That's the sound of an owl, isn't it? An owl is probably within earshot here at Bartlett Park. But if you woke up in the middle of the night and outside your bedroom window you heard that whoo, 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 whoo. What kind of an owl is it? What kind?
Not a barred.
What kind?
Barn owl?
A barred owl? That's a good guess. It's not a barred owl.
Not a barred owl. It's the other big owl.
Young man over there. He had his hand up. No?
Snow owl.
Snowy owl? That's a good guess. It's not a snowy owl.
What's the other big owl we have locally?
Great horned owl in the back row.
Great horned owl. And we brought both a barred owl and a great horned owl today for you to meet, along with 4 other owls. And my name is Mark Wilson. I'm here with Marsha Wilson. And we take care of 14 owls. We brought 6 of them today for you to meet. And all of our owls could be seen locally here in Chelmsford, although snowy owls don't tend to show up until winter here in Chelmsford. But you can see all the others year-round, potentially. And we'll introduce you to your wild neighbors. These are the birds that will be living on conservation land. And that's why land trusts are so important. They preserve land that is not developed, and that's what wildlife needs. They need places that are green, not places that are paved over or, built up. So land trusts are important for wildlife, and we're very happy to be here.
Yeah, and this is the 3rd time that the Land Trust has sponsored our programs. And we're going to talk about how you can find owls either by ear or by seeing them. But usually you can't see owls very well, right? Because usually they come out at night. What do we call nighttime creatures? Nocturnal, yeah.
How many kids here are nocturnal? A lot of kids. Most parents are not nocturnal, I've noticed. Most kids are. And what's the opposite of nocturnal? What do you call an animal that's awake during the day, like you?
What's the word for that?
Diurnal.
Diurnal. Let's all say that. Diurnal.
So snowy owls are often diurnal in the summer because in the Arctic it doesn't get dark. 24-hour sunlight.
In the summer.
In the summer. Yeah. And we'll talk about that when he comes out.
Yeah. And so because owls are so hard to see, sometimes we do hear them. And so we're going to have hooting lessons to teach you the real calls of the kinds of owls that we're going to show you. So that if you happen to hear that, ooh, 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 if you get to know that voice, you could say, oh yeah, that's the great horned owl that lives out behind our house.
So then you say, I think I'm going to hoot to him and see if we get a conversation going.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll answer you. Has anybody ever hooted back to an owl? Okay, did it work? Did they answer? Okay.
They got to be in the mood.
Yeah. Okay, well, these birds are not our pets. We've been doing these presentations now for 27 years, and we are licensed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the federal level and different state licenses for each of the New England states here. And we do over 200 presentations normally.
In a normal year?
Yeah.
What's that, a normal year? I can't remember. It's been kind of a wild, crazy ride here since COVID. But we're happy to be back with a group, and we got nice ventilation under the tent. And if you want to wear a mask, that's fine with us. But I feel like I'm distanced enough that we're not going to go with masks today, and we're both vaccinated.
But
so
it's up to you.
It's up to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to be wearing gloves when I'm holding the owls after all because they have very sharp talons. Right, they're claws, but we call them talons. And the owls are going to be clipped onto my belt, so they're not going to be flying around the tent, underneath the tent, or landing on your shoulders in the back. And some of them can't fly that well anyway. All of the birds that we have a reason that they can't take care of themselves in the wild, called a disability.
So we'll tell you their stories and why they're with us. Because, birds that get injured and then go to rehab usually get released back to the wild. And that's the ultimate goal, is to get them back into the wild. But those birds that kind of flunk out of rehab, they're the ones that we take in and give them a good life for their whole lives. And they can live a long life. It's just that they maybe can't fly, or they have a head injury or a leg injury that would prevent them from surviving on their own. So Marsha's going to be handling the birds with gloves because they have sharp claws called talons. Yeah. And the first 2 owls we're going to bring out are fairly common here in Chelmsford. although I bet most of you have never seen them because they hide during the day down in holes in trees and cavities. They're called eastern screech owls. And these are full grown, they're not babies. And they come in 2 colors.
I'm just going to call up the screech owl call.
Okay. She's going to put the one of the calls on her phone so we can listen to it.
A call that we can't do.
But screech owls have a terrible name because they don't screech. So whoever named them really didn't do their homework. Instead, they have a little horse whinny call that sounds like a horse whinnying, or they have a trill call. And you can hear either of those usually at night, but during the day they're usually silent. They're pretty nocturnal. They're not active during the day. So this is an owl that escapes observation a lot of the time. And then the second color that she's going to bring out, we got the gray one out now. She's going to bring out the rusty red or brown owl, eastern screech owl.
Yeah, that's about as bright as an owl gets.
Now let's listen in. The
here.
gray one's saying something. What's the matter? You cranky? Did we wake you? We woke her up. She's cranky. She's complaining. That's the complaining call of an owl. You won't hear that in the wild. Instead, you'll hear the little horse whinny.
Let's all practice that. Go ahead.
Nicely done.
Great.
Yeah.
Now they also make a nice trill.
And we're going to play this on the... You know, you're born with the ability to trill, or you're not. And neither Marcia nor I can trill. Most people can't. You can do a faux trill going... But that's not really a trill. Listen in to what this sounds like. Can anybody do that? That's pretty good.
Kind of sounds like a great tree frog.
Yeah. Great tree frogs are more explosive in their sound. They go...
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so they make those 2 calls, and screech owls live in people's yards as well as out in wilder places. As a matter of fact, I'd be a little surprised, Mark, wouldn't you, if there wasn't a screech owl somewhere here at Bartlett Park. How many acres here at Bartlett Park? Any of the land trust people know how many acres we have? No?
They can work on that detail while we're talking.
Anyway.
So one of the ways to attract screech owls to your property or neighborhood is to put up a house for them. This is a birdhouse designed for screech owls. Has a 3.5-inch hole made out of 6 pieces of wood. It's pretty easy to build, and you can put this up about 10 feet in a hardwood tree, up 10 feet high, and don't face it to the north or northeast because that's where the prevailing direction of storms comes from, winter storms. And you might want to put up 2 of these because you know squirrels usually take over one and fill it full of leaves. And face it towards your house so you can monitor it, and when that hole disappears, that means there's a screech owl sitting in it looking out. Now, real estate prices here in Chelmsford have gone nuts. I mean, it's hard to find a good birdhouse now for less than $100,000. So, if you put up one of these, you can help alleviate the housing shortage for screech owls. And it's a lot of fun to do. You can make them out of 6 pieces of scrap pine, or you can buy them all made for about $50. But I prefer, since I'm a Yankee, a swamp Yankee, I prefer to build my own with scrap lumber and save some money. So it's a fun thing to do. Now, screech owls are small owls, so that means they're on the menu for hawks, like Cooper's hawks, and maybe great horned owls and Bart Owls. So that means they're good at hiding. So during the day, they're down in a hole in a tree. That's where you're going to find them peeking out maybe. But oftentimes they're out of sight in that hole, and you don't even know they're there. Question here? Are you allowed to hold them? No, and here's 2 reasons why. I know it's tempting, but our permits don't allow the public to touch them because it would be stressful for the owl, and it might be dangerous for you because if the owl reached out and grabbed you with its talons, you'd be bleeding, and we don't want to send you home bleeding. So we'll get you close as we can, but we can't actually touch them.
Yeah. Rebecca, how many acres are here? Yeah. Do any of the other members know? Oh, 11 acres.
Okay.
That's great. Right here in the center of Chelmsford.
So both of these screech owls came to us from Maryland. They were part of a scientific study down at Patuxent, Maryland, the bird banding lab. And the researchers were studying West Nile virus and whether parent owls could pass on disease resistance to West Nile virus. Now, if you or I are bitten by a mosquito infected with West Nile virus, you might feel like you have the flu for a day or two, but it probably won't kill you. On the other hand, owls and hawks and crows that get bitten by infected mosquitoes, it's usually fatal for them. But what the researchers discovered is that the adults can build up some disease resistance to West Nile, and they can pass some of that on to their offspring. And then when the study ended, the researchers had 86 screech owls that needed adoption. And we adopted 4 of the 86. And you can see these are 2 of the 4 that we adopted. So we do know their age. They're 7.5 years old. And we know that they're both females. But if you just look at them, you can't tell their age or whether they're male or female just by looking at them. We know that because we know their hatch day, and a blood test told us that they were females.
Right. And even though they don't have any physical disabilities, they were raised real close to people. So they weren't raised necessarily by their own kind in the wild. So they don't have enough of the skills to be able to survive on their own.
How much do you think a screech owl weighs? Any guesses? What do you think? 2 or 3 pounds? Reasonable guess, but way too much. What do you think? 1 pound, still too much. What's less than 1? 0.83 pounds. We have a future engineer here. That's still too much. What do you think? 20 ounces? Well, that would be more than a pound. How many ounces in a pound? 16, right? So what's half a pound? What's half of 16? 8. Still too much. What do you think over here?
1 pound.
Well, 1 pound, 16 ounces. 1 ounce? That's too low. So here's our range. It's more than 1 ounce, less than 8 ounces. We're getting close. I feel like an auctioneer here.
Young man in the back.
3 ounces, still low. We're going higher. 5 to 6 ounces. You got it. Gold star for you. We have a prize mouse for you after the show. Just kidding.
Now, since screech owls are so small, they can't eat big things like gray squirrels or rabbits, but they can catch small rodents like mice and voles.
They eat a lot of moths
Yep.
and other nocturnal insects, crickets, moths, maybe fireflies. I don't think they really eat mosquitoes. You take an awful lot of mosquitoes to make a meal. But they do eat a lot of nocturnal moths.
And maybe small snakes.
Snakes, worms,
Sure.
salamanders,
frogs.
frogs, small frogs, even fish. And if they're down south, some of them even eat crayfish. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, question there.
Do they turn their heads?
Do they turn their heads? Yes. I think the question you're asking is, do they turn their heads all the way around, right? So they can't do 360 from front and center. But pretend my body's not moving. This is how far they can turn their head in one direction. They can go 220 degrees in one direction, and then back to the front, and then 220 in the other direction. And a lot of the books say they can do 270, but I've never seen an owl do 3/4 of a circle. So if you add 220 plus 220, you get 440 degrees. And that's more than 360, more than a circle, but they can't do that from front center. You have to measure it both directions. And the reason they can do it, they have extra neck bones, more neck bones than we have. How many neck bones do we have? You have more than 1. If you only had 1, you wouldn't be able to turn your head. You'd be like, I can't look at you. 7, right. They have 14. Good job. So the extra neck bones give them that extra mobility. But did you notice they can't move their eyes? Their eyes are fixed straight ahead, so they can't roll their eyes up, down, left, and right. And so they have big eyeballs, 5% of a screech owl's weight is eyeball. If you took a 160-pound human and took 5% of their weight, they'd have, each eyeball would weigh 4 pounds. Imagine that, going into school with 8 pounds of eyeballs. You'd see really good at night. All right, just when you thought you saw the cutest owl, we're going to go cuter and smaller. Screech owls are permanent residents. They don't migrate. They're here year-round. This next owl is a migratory owl. It's called a northern saw-whet owl. Tiny, tiny, cute. And like screech owls, this owl does not hoot. So not all owls hoot. In fact, this owl does what we call toot. This owl toots. And that doesn't mean this owl farts. That means this owl has a tooting call. And if you can whistle, it goes like this. It goes. If you can't whistle, you can go toot, 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 toot. So give it a call. Give it a try. Okay, now do that for 20 minutes. Just kidding. And you know that this owl got its name in the old days. If you had a saw and you were cutting firewood and your saw got dull, you would sharpen your saw with a file. And the sound of the file on those steel teeth would make a sound that sounds like this owl would go. Someone thought, hey, that sounds like that owl we're hearing. Let's call it a saw-whet owl. Saw-whet means wet your saw or sharpen your saw. Now, this owl probably doesn't nest too commonly in Chelmsford. And it does migrate through here though, so in late October, early November, hundreds of these owls migrate through this area. Just to show you how many we have come through here, several Halloweens ago I was down in Lincoln, Massachusetts at Drumlin Farm with a bird bander, and we were banding saw-whet owls that night. Kathy Seymour was the bander. And we caught 43 saw-whet owls in one night in her mist nets. So I said, oh, okay, I'm going to go back the next day to that woodlot, and I'll be able to get a nice picture of a saw-whet owl by daylight. So I went back to that woodlot the following morning, and guess how many saw-whet owls I found? 0. They're so good at hiding. So these owls sit in the thickest part of the tree that they can find. So a thick pine tree, spruce tree, hemlock tree, even like junipers in your yard. They sometimes sit in thick shrubs, and you can walk right by them and never see them.
Yeah. Now think about the snow being on the ground in the wintertime, and the predators that depend on small rodents like mice and voles, like the smaller owls. It's really hard, if not impossible, for them to break through a really thick, icy crust of snow, and a lot of times they starve.
Yeah, so, and they're also on the menu, so a bigger owl like a Bart owl could get them, or a Cooper's hawk could get them, so they're pretty hesitant to leave that thick cover during the day. They know that it's dangerous. Like a screech owl, they're a cavity nester, so most little owls nest in cavities, like birdhouses, and you know, they can't dig their own cavity in a dead tree. They rely on woodpeckers to do the hard work. So if you have a dead snag with a woodpecker hole in it, that might be attractive to a saw-whet or screech owl to either nest or roost. So pileated woodpeckers will carve, you know, a nice 3-inch hole that oftentimes will attract these guys. And so if you have that big crow-sized woodpecker called a pileated woodpecker, pay attention to where they're chipping away these cavities, and then check them regularly. You might find owls peeking out. We have a question down front. Go for it.
How do owls turn their head all the way backwards?
How do owls turn all their heads all the way backwards? Well, they have those extra neck bones that allow them the extra movement. What's really interesting, though, if you or I were able to turn our head straight over our backs, say you could for some fluky reason, your arteries and your veins would twist and you'd black out. It would cut off the blood supply to your head. And you don't see owls fainting, do you? No, they have a special blood supply that allows them to turn their head 220 degrees and still get blood flow to the brain. Very handy.
Now,
Very handy.
this is a very lucky owl. She was rescued in the middle of the road in Revere. She had been hit by a car or a truck 2 years ago. And somebody rescued her. They realized that she needed help because her head was upside down and her right wing was broken. So they were able to scoop her up and bring her to New England Wildlife Center in Weymouth. And after 4 months of wildlife rehabilitation, the head righted itself. And they determined right away that she hadn't broken her neck. Fortunately, she had a neurological injury called torticollis that causes the head to tilt to one side or the other, and hers was really upside down. She did have a broken right wing, and that really couldn't be mended perfectly, so she can't fly well enough to be able to be released.
And she weighs in at 2 to 3 ounces. And she's not the smallest owl in North America. That would be the elf owl, which is found out west in the arid regions of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, a little bit of California. And they're the size of a sparrow. So this owl is small, but there are even a few smaller owls in the western U.S. Question here. You forget? Okay.
Mark, you
we'll come back.
have a picture of an elf owl in a hole, don't you, in your book?
Yeah, I'm not going to bring that out, but I'm
Right.
going to take some more questions. Go for it.
One time, I looked into a hole and I found so many tiny owls.
You said one time he looked into a hole and found a teeny tiny elf owl in it. Where were you, out in the Sonoran Desert? Maybe not. Well, you might have seen a baby owl. It probably wasn't an elf owl, though. It might have been a baby screech owl. Yeah, because they're small when they're babies. They come out of an egg this big. So they got to fit into an egg that size. When they first hatch, they're naked, they're blind, they're helpless, and that's probably what you saw. An elf owl would be similar, but you'd see that out west, not here in Chelmsford. Yes? What's this owl over here? That's a snowy owl. He'll come out last. You'll get a nice view. You remembered? Go ahead.
It looks like pretty big.
Well, an owl can go more than 360. It just isn't from front and center. So, picture this. The owl turns its head 220. You stop measuring from here, and it can go 440 degrees all the way around. But if you measure from the front and center, they can only do 220. So you know what I mean? It all depends where you start measuring from. Think about it. It's geometry.
Mark?
You don't do geometry? What grade are you in? 4th grade? It's coming, believe me. All right.
Mark, we have a present for you from the next owl.
Oh, a nice pellet. And this is what they cough up.
What?
If you ate chicken last night for dinner and you were an owl, you'd be coughing up the bones and feathers. This owl had a nice white mouse. 10 hours later, it coughed up this nice little pellet. Doesn't come out of the rear end, this is out of the mouth, so it's regurgitated.
Have any of you ever taken apart an owl pellet? Maybe in school or at Scouts? Okay. Good.
And you know, once in a blue moon, an owl at our programs will cough up a pellet in front of the audience. It hasn't happened in a while, so we'll see if this next owl might cough up a pellet.
Yeah, so owl pellets are one of the signs that you want to look for outdoors when you're walking around.
Looking for owls.
Hello.
Just keep talking.
And so owl pellets can help you find owls. The other sign that we've seen a couple of the owls do already is whitewash. That's a polite word for bird droppings. And so you might notice that on the ground as well.
This is a barred owl. How does it get its name, Marcia?
Gets its name from the bars, the pattern that run from shoulder to shoulder. They're bars. These are stripes down here.
Stripes are vertical,
Yep.
bars are horizontal.
And I bet a lot of you have heard barred owls. They go, "Ooh, ooh, 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 ooh." Anybody ever heard that?
A
Okay.
lot of hands.
All right. Well, if you put words to it, like my mom taught me to do when I was 6 years old, she said, if you memorize who cooks for you all, you'll remember who all. So, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? I'll do it, and you can do it. Go ahead. Okay, and then sometimes they skip the first 6 notes and they just do the you-all part. They go, hoo-all. Go ahead. Hoo-all. Okay.
And then there's another call. If 3 or 4 of them get going all together, it's called caterwauling. And it goes like this. It goes.
Anybody ever heard that?
Sounds like monkeys in the woods. And then the last call, which we're not going to imitate, but you might hear it, it's a blood-curdling scream. And a lot of people think, when they hear that, that they're listening to a fisher, when in fact they're listening to a barred owl, not a fisher. So barred owls are increasing in Massachusetts. In fact, they're on Cape Cod now. And 20 years ago, this was a rare bird on Cape Cod. Now they're breeding in many towns on the Cape. And I think, I hate to say it, but I think they're out-competing screech owls in some areas. And screech owls are starting to become uncommon in some towns as barred owls get more common. Now, they will use a birdhouse, but of course it has to be a lot bigger than the one up here. It has to have an 8-inch hole, and it's a bigger floor plan, and it has to go up 20 to 30 feet in a tree. And that would take 2 or 3 people to put that up. But they often will use a box. There's also a housing shortage in Chelmsford for barred owls. So it's worth putting up a box or buying one if you don't want to make your own. They eat a lot of cool things. They eat salamanders and frogs and fish. They love chipmunks and flying squirrels. They will take red squirrels. Occasionally they'll take small birds. If you see one at your bird feeder sitting outside the house there just kind of at the bird feeder, it's not likely going to catch a bird. It's more likely looking for mice that are coming in to eat spilled bird seed on the ground. So they're often waiting for rodents to show up underneath the bird feeder.
Yeah, and that happens pretty frequently during the wintertime when there's a heavy snowpack that they can't break through. They don't have very big feet, and they don't weigh very much. They only weigh about 1.5 to 2 pounds.
So this bird's 1.5 pounds.
Yep. And so they can't really punch through icy snow or really, really deep snow. Now, this is another lucky owl. She was found in the middle of the road or side of the road somewhere in New Hampshire, hit by a car or a truck.
That's not why she's lucky, though.
She's lucky she was rescued.
Right.
And brought to a wildlife rehabilitator in New Hampshire. And she realized right away that she had a broken wing. And so she took her to a vet, and they examined her, they x-rayed the wing, and it turned out that that wing just couldn't be repaired.
So you can see how that right wing's hanging down. It's not being held up close to the body like the other wing is. And so she gets a handicap ramp in her aviary because she can't fly, and she doesn't want to be on the ground. So most owls don't want to be sitting on the ground, maybe except for snowy owls, which will sit on the ground a lot. And she could live into her 20s or 30s. We don't know her age, and we thought it was a he for about 1.5 years. And then one day, Marcia was giving a program at a 3rd grade class, and she opened up the door, and guess what was sitting right here? An egg. He was a she. Who knew? And so, I know someone's going to ask me, what did we do with the egg? So, it wasn't fertile, so it wasn't going to hatch, so I took it and put it on the compost pile, and I think a raccoon ate it. So it made a nice meal for a raccoon.
Now, when you look at an owl's face, you'll notice that there's a big circle of feathers, or many circles around each eye. Mark, what are those called?
Those are called facial discs, and they help an owl hear. So if you want to hear like an owl, try this. Take your hands, hold them up, palms forward, cup your hands, and with your palms still forward, put them behind each ear. And you've just extended your ears. You're collecting more sound when you do that. And that's how an owl can hear the smallest little sounds and really pick up on small mice rustling in the forest floor.
Right, because birds' ears are right on the side of their head.
Right behind the eyes. All right, you had a patient question back there. Go for it. Why does he look angry? Oh, hungry. What makes you say he looks hungry? Because he did get she did get 4 mice last night. Yeah, so she is well fed.
All of our birds get offered food every day.
We don't feed wild mice though. We feed mice that we buy from a farm. Did you ever know there were mouse farms? And they're free-range vegan mice. They're very healthy. But we don't feed wild mice because we never know if our neighbors are using mouse poison, rodenticides. If there's one thing that I have you take away today from this program, is please don't use rodenticides. When you poison a rat or a mouse, it doesn't die right away. It'll often go outside looking for water after it's been poisoned. And it makes an easy meal for a hawk or an owl, or a cat, or even a raccoon, or a weasel, or a fox, or a skunk. And when that animal ingests that rodenticide, it causes internal bleeding. So rather than use poison and you have a mouse in the house, use a snap trap. It kills them immediately. It doesn't poison anybody. You can bait it with peanut butter, unless you're allergic to peanuts. And then it kills that mouse right away. If you have a rat in the house, you got to go with the Magnum trap. This bad boy, you got to be careful setting it, because this bail, if you get your fingers under there, it could break your fingers. But when this goes off, it's impressive. I just do that to wake people up.
Yeah, so mouse poison and rat poisons really are a big problem with birds of prey. Not just owls, but hawks, falcons, almost all
Mammals.
birds. Mammals too.
Yeah.
Yep.
And rodenticide's nasty stuff. It causes internal bleeding in the animal that ingests it. Question here.
It's not really a question, but I have around my house. I have those kind of owls, and it's around my house they breed.
They breed?